technical issues. The questions that were received during the original recording on 9/12 will be addressed during this recording, and they have also will also be part of the updated FAQ. And all of this will be posted to the realignment website on Illinois WorkNet, and we'll give you that address later. So to get started, just want to give you a little background. The purpose of this webinar is to give a general overview and up-to-date status of the realignment process. The agenda, Marcus, if you wouldn't care to advance the slide, the agenda, thank you, outlines the sections, and so we'll cover things like workforce planning areas, WIOA Planning Regulations, and realignment considerations. And this is all to give you a background and to an update on the ongoing process that Illinois has been conducting over the past several months regarding the need to have planning regions aligned with economic development regions. A citation or a finding from the United States Department of Labor's assessment of the state of Illinois in 2017 found that the state was not in compliance with the requirement that WIOA planning regions must be consistent with labor market areas and regional economic development regions. So therefore, the sections of the presentation will take us through this process, and so you'll have a better understanding of what we went through or what the state went through to get to where we are today and to move forward. So let me try advancing the slide. That worked. Okay. So under WIOA, the governor has the responsibility to designate local workforce areas. As you are aware, they can be one or more counties. The transition from WIA to WIOA left the counties, or the LWIAs as they were, and Illinois had 26 local workforce areas, but over time, a few local workforce areas have merged or transitioned, and now Illinois has 22. So there are three legs to the stool that, so to speak, that the governor must use to designate local workforce areas that are outlined here on this slide. And they must be data-driven and consistent with all of these elements. So we talk about labor market areas, and labor market areas are determined through an examination of commuting patterns, where people live and where they work. Information such as the Metropolitan Statistical areas, or MSAs, workforce commuting patterns provide a snapshot of the local labor, of the labor market areas. And it's been noted previously that labor market information and primarily commuting patterns are the basis for the realignment. Commuting patterns are only one of many data points to establish that were used to establish regions. And as you'll look at this Metropolitan Statistical Area map, you'll get an idea of where they are, how they're outlined. And as noted, the fundamental building block for establishment of regions is the MSA. So MSAs are designated by the U.S. Census Bureau as an area that it contains a large population center and adjacent communities that have a high degree of integration with that center. This data is key to what we do, and as we look at the data, as we've looked at the data and continue to look at the data, it's key to the development of economic development region lines and the consistency there. So, planning regions. Regions were established in 2003, and extensive input was provided by workforce education and economic development. And the most current data that's available is from the American Community Survey, which covers the 5-year survey period of 2009 to 2013. It provides the best source of reliable data for the determination of commuting patterns. And should be noted as well that the current 5-year survey period is underway. It should be completed at the end of this year, but new survey data won't be available to the public for another 1 to 2 years. And based on the requirements for WIO planning regions, after an analysis of these requirements, the state, including agency partners and the State Workforce Board, has determined that the WIOA planning regions align with the existing 10 economic development regions. That information continues to be analyzed, and it is still consistent with the way the EDRs are lined out. And as you can see in this map, it outlines the local workforce areas and the regions. And a careful look shows where the EDR lines are drawn, and that Ogle, DeWitt, Livingston, Douglas, Jersey, and Calhoun counties are impacted by these by this requirement. And so note that the EDRs were determined by the data points, or by the dot points here on this slide, and therefore the conclusion. So we have a data-driven policy. The regulations say that it has to be data-driven. So in order to establish the regions and the planning regions, you have to have data to back it up. So the principles state that it requires the use of labor market and data-driven policy and strategic decisions by the state, and the state has re-reviewed the data, continues to review the criteria to ensure that this is met. This was not taken lightly. So below are the strategies of Illinois, and as you know, the state has a plan. The State Workforce Board must have a plan for the state, just as local workforce areas and regions must have a plan. The strategies outlined here were developed to achieve the vision and mission, and I think it's pretty clear. I don't think anyone would disagree that these strategies are good for everyone. So I would venture to say that most, if not all, of these strategies are part of each of the plans that are developed in the local regions and plans as well, because it is an overall look at what the workforce is needed. So that brings us to the end of the first section that we have. And we'll answer, during this section we had a question from Pam Ferlin. Can you point me to where I can get more information on the planning regions and when they were designated? And yes, we can do that. As a matter of fact, it's on the WIOA regional planning page, and we'll put that link up so you can access that if you're not familiar with it. So we will give you that. There you go. It's on the left-hand side of your screen. And so we'll move forward then. John, you want to take it?
Great, and thank you, and good morning. This is John Barr with the Illinois Department of Commerce, and I'm speaking today on behalf of our core agency partners with the Illinois Department of Commerce, Department of Employment Security, Department of Human Services, and the Illinois Community College Board. And this information, as Deb had mentioned, is provided to you as an overview of the overall project that we have worked as a team to develop and provide these information and meetings over the last several months. The next part of this presentation will review the law and regulations regarding the WIOA planning regions. So in accordance with the WIOA, a single local workforce area cannot be split across two planning regions. Local areas must be contiguous, touching each other in order to be a planning region and effectively align economic and workforce development activities and resources. Back in 2017, the U.S. Department of Labor conducted a review of the state of Illinois, conducted what they characterized as the WIOA implementation review back in July of 2017. One of the findings that came out of that review was that Illinois was directed to identify a regional structure that did not result in any single local workforce area being split into 2 or more regions. This finding was a bit of a surprise for the state of Illinois because, as many of you may recall, the way that the state of Illinois had approached the regional planning process going all the way back to 2014 and 2015 with WIOA implementation was to allow local workforce areas that had splits to work in both planning regions. So in other words, allowed local areas to have that flexibility to be working with multiple regions within their local workforce area. But the bottom line, last year, Department of Labor issued a finding and said that based on the regulations, as previously noted in slide 13, that that was not allowed per the new WIOA regulations. So the realignment process was included as part of the state of Illinois' unified workforce plan submission in March of 2018. So as many of you know, the state has to develop a comprehensive plan and submit it every 4 years to the U.S. Department of Labor and Department of Education. And we were directed by Department of Labor to include information about how the state of Illinois would address this issue regarding the overlap with local areas and the planning regions. So in order to address the finding, we developed a corrective action strategy, and part of that strategy was to complete what was called a consultation process, or a meeting and discussion process with local elected officials and the state to get some feedback. We did complete this process, and that was our goal, that we submitted in the state's plan, and we submitted those initial conversations by actually it was before the end of June of this year. So what's the importance of moving forward and addressing the finding, providing the corrective action? Well, without an approved workforce plan, Illinois could have been subject to sanctions, including the withholding of funding, definitely from Title I and Title III, and our other applications for non-formula funding, such as Apprenticeship USA grants or National Dislocated Worker grants could have potentially been impacted if we were non-compliant. So as I mentioned, we did have initial consultation meetings. 5 local workforce areas, as Deb mentioned, are split across planning regions, and those include Ogle County with LWIA 4, Livingston County with LWIA 11, DeWitt County with LWIA 19, Jersey and Calhoun counties with LWIA 21, and Douglas County with LWIA 23. So as part of our corrective action strategy, Illinois re-reviewed the data, and we began this discussion or consultation process with the impacted counties. So this webinar represents kind of the next phase of the overall consultation process, where we're bringing the information, much of the same information that we shared with these 6 counties, to the workforce and education system as a whole. So Illinois did submit a formal waiver request in July of 2018. The state of Illinois was made aware that the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, actually received and approved a waiver from the state of Nebraska regarding the local workforce area regional alignment requirement. So again, that requirement back on slide 13, Nebraska actually received a waiver and was approved for that. So in August of this year, the state partners worked with the State Workforce Innovation Board and the state team to request and develop a waiver request of the LWIA Regional Realignment requirement. The waiver has been posted for public comment and should be submitted by mid-October is the estimate. It's important to note that this is part of a kind of an intentional process, and the state did act pretty quickly in August to put together the waiver and to have several high-level discussions with both the governor's office and the local workforce, or I'm sorry, the state workforce board, as well as the state partners. And so now it's important to note a number of the waiver requirements. First and foremost, the waiver has not been approved as of this date. We anticipate that our Illinois waiver will be approved because it includes many of the same components that the Nebraska waiver that was approved contained. The second point is that the Department of Labor has advised that there are no guarantees that a waiver would be renewed beyond the 2020 planning process. So I mentioned the state submitted a modification to the state's plan that was due, it goes into effect July 1 of 2018. Well, the next planning cycle, the plan goes into effect July 1 of 2020, and Department of Labor is saying that their waivers are only good through the next approval of the plan, and therefore it is certainly possible that waivers would end on June 30th of 2020 and would not get extended beyond. But they have not indicated either way whether it is not a black and white decision as far as if a waiver would be extended or if it would not be extended. So that is information that would need to be worked through as it became clear and we were directed by the U.S. Department of Labor. Third piece is, if Illinois' waiver is approved, chief elected officials may be provided with the flexibility to retain the current regional and local workforce area boundaries based on the considerations listed below. Number one, counties and local workforce areas that are in multiple regions would need to agree to actively participate in the regional planning process of both regions. So, for example, Ogle County is currently located in Local Area 4. So if Ogle County were to continue to remain in LWIA 4, LWIA 4 would need to participate actively in the development of the Northwest Regional Plan as well as the Northern State Line Regional Plan. Number two, the CEOs must verify that they have reviewed all of the data and all of the realignment options and have agreed to the local workforce area configuration, in other words, retaining the current boundaries or that are currently located in two planning regions. And three, the local workforce areas and the counties that do not realign must agree to work with the state in 2020 if the waiver is not renewed or reapproved by the U.S. Department of Labor's. We want to be clear in the possibility that LWIAs could be required to complete the regional planning process in 2020, because that's when it's up for everyone, and then turn right back around in 2021 if the waiver is not renewed. And again, Department of Labor has not indicated one way or the other of whether those renewals would be made after July 1 of 2020, but it certainly is a possibility. So this is probably a good point for another set of questions that were asked during the webinar. And the first was asked, one of the education partners asked, what defines a local workforce area? And this answer, again, will be listed in the frequently asked question. But the response is a local workforce area is designated by the governor based on the requirements outlined in Section 106 of the Local Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. Local workforce areas, as Deb mentioned in the slides, must be consistent with labor market areas in the state, consistent with regional economic development areas, and have the available federal and non-federal resources necessary to effectively administer activities under WIOA. And Deb, do you want to get the next question?
Sure, yeah, thanks, John. We also had a question about where the waiver is posted. I think Pam asked that, and was updated data that local areas provided included in the waiver. I would like to first say that the submission of the waiver from the requirement was also assisted by some additional information that was submitted to the state and state partners based on those county meetings that we had. So we thank the local areas and our county CEOs for providing that additional data, because that did assist with the basis of forming the waiver request. We will post that where the waiver is actually posted on the WIOA state plan page on Illinois workNet, and we'll put that over in the chat pod as well. Thank you. And it was the data that the local areas provided included. I don't think the individual data pieces that were submitted were included, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think the information that was provided helped provide the basis for the waiver request.
That's right, absolutely, and that's a great point to emphasize, is that the response, and we have received some formal responses, particular for from the northern counties, that included some strong arguments and data that was very helpful in the discussions with the governor's office and the state board and the state partners that I think was essential in the decision of the state to move forward and request the waiver in and of itself. So that was great feedback and is definitely appreciated. Okay, I think we'll go to the next question from an education partner, and the question is, what implications does this have on community college districts that overlap several economic development districts? And the answer is that, generally speaking, community college district boundaries would not be impacted by the local workforce area realignment. The information that is provided by the state to support, or that was provided by the state to support the regional planning process, includes the community college districts, and you can see in those regional planning documents that can be downloaded by accessing that first link there in the chat pod. You can go to one of those regional planning pages, and you can see how those community college district lines overlap with the local workforce areas and also with the regions. And so Bottom line is that this should not have a significant impact and absolutely would not redraw any community college district lines. Okay. Deb, do you want to
sorry
take the
about
next
that.
one?
Yeah,
That's all right.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we had another question from a local workforce partner that if the waiver is approved by DOL, when will we find out if it'll be approved past 2020? Well, if as John said, the waiver should be submitted by mid-October, and if it's approved, then we have no indication that it won't be approved. That it will be considered through the life of the current unified state plan, which that ends June 30th of 2020. Based on that, the state would be required to submit a new waiver request in 2020, and it is anticipated that the decision regarding the waiver would coincide with the submission of Illinois' Unified Workforce Plan in the spring of 2020. So I guess the short answer to that is we really wouldn't know until possibly the spring of 2020, which would, that would put us on a very short or compressed timetable.
Great. Okay, there was another question. Will the state be issuing any guidance on the process to notify the state regarding the decision of whether or not they're going to move forward with realignment, or would just an email or a letter suffice? The answer is that those specific logistic details have not been finalized, and we will be in contact with those impacted areas and provide additional information, and also we'll post that information on the project website. Another question is, what happens if one local workforce area wants to realign, however the losing or gaining areas oppose? For example, if LWIA 7 is, or LWIA 17 over in the Champaign County area is in favor of gaining Douglas County, but the current LWIA, LWIA 23, is opposed, what would happen then? So the answer is a chief elected official or local workforce area does not have the authority to force realignment. It is suggested that the CEOs of the counties meet and discuss the potential opportunities to align workforce services, and the state is absolutely available to assist in putting this meeting together and to facilitating these discussions.
Right. And subsequent to that, we had another question that isn't it a county decision, not an LWIA decision? And the answer to that is yes, that the governor, in consultation with the CEOs, actually makes the decisions. But given that, and going back to what John and I said previously, that's why the consultation meetings were held in those impacted counties, to give the chief elected officials the basis for the information that they needed to develop a strategy or their thought process on this whole issue.
Okay.
And all of these, I will put, just as an aside, I would say that all of these questions will be answered in the updated FAQ and will be uploaded to the website as well.
Great. Thanks, Deb. So the final portion of the webinar is to discuss some of the realignment considerations. As we noted, the first priority of this project was to focus on the compliance and regulatory issues regarding the local workforce and regional planning areas as required by the U.S. Department of Labor. So although the state is going to request additional flexibility with a waiver, This is important to note that the state does stand by the original recommendation to align or realign those 6 counties within the 10 current economic development regions. And again, this was based on the data and other factors that we had outlined in this webinar. To be clear, if the state of Illinois' waiver is approved, local workforce areas will not be required to realign, at least through the life of that waiver. Now, as we start to prepare for the 2020 WIOA planning process, this is a logical time for you, the chief elected officials, the local workforce boards, program partners, and administrators to review the patterns of WIOA funding, the patterns in participant service levels, as well as your administrative costs and your ability to provide services to your counties and to your local areas. The state does recommend that all chief elected officials and local teams review the data and consider the realignment and or consolidation of local areas as an option to provide the most efficient and effective workforce services to job seekers and businesses. We acknowledge that many efforts have already been completed to streamline operation and provide more efficient service delivery. Examples of that is with the consolidation of local areas 4 and 12 in the north central areas, areas 15 and 16 in the Peoria and Bloomington areas, and of course local areas 7, 8, and 9 many years ago in the Cook County and Chicago area. The state would like to offer its support to local workforce areas that consider the voluntary realignment and or consolidation of those areas. The state recognizes that certainly the reconfiguration
You are joining the meeting.
Work with local workforce innovation boards, program administrators, and other stakeholders to develop transition plans and documents following the considerations that we're going to go through in this final section of the webinar. And some of those considerations include some of the governance and planning requirements, fiscal management, service delivery, performance and reporting, and other local considerations. From a governance and planning perspective, and again, all of this information is based on some of the best practices that the state has learned in working with those areas that have consolidated, that have realigned. And we've developed some best practices and some templates that have worked. We recognize that there are absolutely everything needs to be customized based on the local area and how you're delivering services, but generally there's a lot of information that can be shared, a lot of lessons learned applied to any areas that are considering this voluntary or a voluntary realignment or consolidation. As it relates to governance and planning, certainly all of those documents, so those key agreements, the chief elected officials agreements that talk about how the county board chairs will work to oversee the operations, the local workforce board agreements with those elected officials, the grant recipient agreements, fiscal agent agreements, regional and local workforce plans. As I mentioned, the state is gearing up for this whole planning process that essentially starts in the spring of 2019 for those plans that will go into effect starting July of 2020. and of course the Memorandum of Understanding, the document that is required by the Department of Labor and Education to outline how services are provided among all of the required program partners, as well as how are those costs shared in those comprehensive workforce centers, American Job Centers. This next slide just talks about some of the trends in workforce funding, and I'll focus on WIOA Title I funding for adults, dislocated worker, and youth. And as you can see, we've gone from a high of local area funding of $122 million to a low of 105. And so certainly with the federal funding environment, that is an area that the state continues to watch very closely, and we certainly understand that the workforce system, education system, continues to advocate for continued resources to support training programs. This is a listing of those formula grants, although you see there was some fluctuation, some ups and downs over the last year. We did take a fairly significant cut. We recognize that several LWIAs took double-digit cuts in some areas with some of the different funding titles. And this information, although difficult to see on this slide, will be available on the planning website to assist local areas as they complete their analysis around the funding and projections for levels of support for continued services. One of the slides, or one of the set of slides that we provided to the 6 counties that we had consultation meetings with was the overall impact of realignment on a specific county. So again, going back to our Ogle County example, if Ogle County were to move from Workforce Area 4 to Workforce Area 3, based on the local workforce area, or based on the WIOA Title I formula funding factors, or the data factors, there would be a small change, a small increase in funding that Ogle County, could potentially see. And again, areas don't have, there isn't the grants aren't split out, by county. It is, all of the counties put together. So, for instance, in local area 3, their annual allocation is based on the 3 counties, Winnebago, Boone, and Stephenson County, that is, aggregated, and those factors go into the formula. But we're able to isolate, by county. And the bottom line here is that funding, if you were to move a county from one local area to the next, it essentially does not have an impact on the level of formula funding that is provided for that specific county based on the formula allocation. The next slide illustrates the shift in the local area. As I mentioned, although the county wouldn't necessarily be financially impacted, the local workforce area certainly would. And so, that allocation, so if Ogle County were to move up to local workforce area 3, obviously LWIA 4's grant would lose $587,000, and LWIA 3's grant would increase by $582,000. So again, just to show the overall impact, because as it relates to administration and other costs, it can have a significant impact, as you see here, on shifting counties from one area to the next. From a service delivery perspective, there are a number of potential impacts, and for those, Deb, do you want to go ahead and
Sure.
go through these? Great.
Sure. Thanks, John. Yeah, and you know, all of what we've talked about and led up to this point, you know, is all a major consideration. But when it comes to service delivery, it's a major focus during any kind of transition, whether it's consolidation of local workforce areas or it's a change in service provider, et cetera. Service delivery is always of the utmost importance. As we know with WIOA, services must be delivered across the state and provided to individuals regardless of where they live. So the state will provide technical assistance to ensure that the continuity of services to individuals and the appropriateness of transfers and service providers is done appropriately. The primary concern is that with any realignment or transition, that the actions of that transaction, so to speak, don't affect the provision of services to clients. So policies have to be looked at, procedures and processes are also considered. The elements that are listed here on this slide are by no means comprehensive, but are part of the considerations that are necessary to complete a transition. We want to make sure that, you know, anyone who is enrolled in currently in a training program can continue with that training program. There is nothing that would prevent that from, you know, from happening. But it also, and these points also underscore the importance of working with the local and regional teams leading up to the 2020 planning period to make sure that we can, you know, get everything taken care of. So as we look at Title I service levels, these are just the numbers that we have across the state. And as you can see, there's just a slight fluctuation across the board from 2013 to 2017. These are put on here just mainly to give you a perspective what the state sees when they look at numbers. And when we did our individual county meetings, the numbers were presented to them on the local level as well, so that they understood what the impact of a transition would mean. Again, out of those numbers, we look at the participants that are enrolled in training, and there's been, again, some fluctuation over the years. And again, this is just to give you the perspective of how many we actually have enrolled across the state in training. And some additional considerations of performance and reporting. So the state is prepared to provide technical assistance to ensure the continuum of services for performance questions, transfer of any training providers or additional guidance can be provided regarding the development of the 2020 regional and local plans. As I said previously, you know, there have been questions previously about, you know, well, you know, what if I have somebody enrolled in training in my local workforce area and then they're moved to another local workforce area? Those training situations, that's what we will help facilitate to make sure that that continuum of services is there and the impact is at an extreme minimum. So John provided the beginning of our timeline. He kind of walked you through where we were at with the timeline and the things that have occurred up to now. So what we're at now is with October to November. As we said, that the waiver has been developed. It's out for the 30-day comment period, and it should be submitted by the middle of October. And we'll continue to, the state team will continue to coordinate any individual meetings that are necessary or needed or wanted with the chief elected officials and stakeholders. And then in November, we'll look for a decision from those impacted counties, those CEOs of the impacted counties and local workforce areas regarding the realignment of the counties. And that is important to note that is by November 30th. Then in December, we're going to look at providing, and ongoing actually, so just kind of looking at the timeline, the state team will provide significant technical assistance, including on-site trainings or meetings, facilitating meetings, providing sample documents, program and fiscal management assistance, any kind of assistance that really the local workforce needs to move forward with the realignment process. Then from April 19 through March of 20, the regions and local workforce areas should be in that planning process. So they should be developing their process, their plans for 2020, and anything that the state can do to facilitate that planning process is going to be on the table as well for assistance. And then the plans have to be executed and with an effective date of July 1 of 2020. So that's kind of it in a nutshell on the timing and the timeline and the planning process. We recognize that there's a lot of significant work that is that revolves around the planning process. So again, being cognizant of those timelines and timeframes and the work that goes into it, the state tried to facilitate the flexibility, as much as possible to help so that it's not, for lack of a better word, redundant or a necessary process 2 years in a row. John, do we need to cover anything else? Have we covered it?
Yeah, I think there were, two final questions that we had. One was from a local workforce area, and the question was, does the information that you provided today impact all of the LWIAs or just the 6 counties that were focused on in the finding? So the answer is that from a state perspective, this is relevant for all local workforce areas. As we noted, the state does recommend that all of the CEOs and local teams review the data and consider realignment and consolidation as appropriate. To be 100% clear, the state is not requiring realignment. The state is not requiring consolidations, but we want to utilize the capacity that we have developed working with the state board, working with the state partners on this project to provide that assistance, to offer that assistance to CEOs and to local workforce partners if you consider going down that realignment process. And we would definitely encourage you, as we mentioned, to review your data, review your options, and the bottom line is the state is available to assist you as you prepare for the 2020 planning process, whether or not you're one of the 6 counties that were included in the findings. A final question was if supplemental funds are available to support planning efforts during a transition period and or prior to the formal realignment. And the response to that is that we do have funding available for regional planning efforts, and those are considered on a case-by-case basis under the WIOA Statewide Innovation, Statewide Activities Funds. We do have a current funding application, or what's called a Notice of Funding Opportunity, available, and we would certainly consider those projects as needed and would work with you, as I said, on a case-by-case basis. So I think those were the final questions of the webinar.
Right, and thanks, John. And now we have the project website where you can go in there and look at it. the information that was presented to all the counties. It's all out there. You have my contact information. If you have any further questions, please reach out. I would also draw your attention to the download pod there. The webinar is posted there, the FAQ, and the executive summary that was developed as part of this project as well. The FAQ will be and is being updated with the questions from this webinar, so we'll keep everybody up to date on everything that we have questions, and as questions are received, it will continue. It's a living document, so it is continually being updated based on the responses and questions that we get. So that being said, I think we've covered all the bases. We've answered the questions that were directed to us during the webinar, and again, with this slide you have the project website and my contact information. If you have any further questions, would suggest that you email your questions to us so we can take a look at them. And we thank you for your participation and your interest in this project, and certainly hope that everything is going well. And again, thank you for your time. John, any further comments?
No, again, thank you all for your interest in this, and please contact us if you have any questions or need assistance, and thank you again.
Okay. Marcus?